Today on Ancient DOS Games, we're taking a look at Major Stryker, and I will admit, I probably could have come up with a better hint in last week's episode since there are actually people out there with the last name Stryker, spelled with a Y. But let's face it, it's still intentionally spelled wrong, and even my word processor agrees. Of course, my word processor also thinks my last name is spelled wrong. Nah, whatever. People guessed it right anyway, so the hint must not have been that bad. This game, on the other hand, well... I want to like this game. I really do. It's a 2D shooter, and I generally love 2D shooters. There's a great concept behind it, the music's okay, the graphics are pretty good for EGA, but this game has issues that simply make it not fun and anger-inducing to all but those who have mastered it. Kind of like sports. I don't doubt that there are people out there who love this game, but they can probably deal with its key issues, and just looking at the gameplay you can probably guess some of them already. But maybe not, so I'm going to go into detail, starting with the game stats. Major Stryker was released by ADG in 1993 and is a one-player 2D shooter. I should note that by this point in time there were all kinds of 2D shooters on other consoles, but the PC didn't really have too many yet, especially those with scrolling levels. It features EGA 320x200 16-color graphics, supports PC speaker and Sound Blaster sound, but if you lacked a Sound Blaster card you could still use an ad-lib card for the music. As for its release date, it was made freeware by 3D Realms in March of 2006, and you can easily get the full game from the download section of the 3D Realms website at www.3drealms.com. The story is fairly typical for this kind of game. Earth survives a Third World War with billions dead and very little left in the way of military hardware, then some alien race called the Cretans jumps through a nearby wormhole and decides it wants to conquer us. Of course. Obviously this is unacceptable, so the call is placed to Major Stryker, a world-renowned hero of the recent war, who takes a specially modified attack ship through the wormhole to decimate the Cretans on the other side. Yeah, it really isn't anything more complicated than that, except that the Cretans have also taken hundreds of hostages, and you have to do your best to free as many as possible by ramming their holding cells with your ship, since they're immune to weapons fire. The game takes place across 3 missions, each featuring 4 areas, with each area featuring 2 levels and a boss. The first mission to the lava planet takes you past the space station, through a water zone, a land zone, then finally the lava zone itself. The second mission to the Arctic planet first puts you into the Arctic zone, followed by another land zone, a city zone, and then finally another lava zone, which is kind of weird. The last mission to the desert planet first takes you past another space station, a desert zone, yet another lava zone, and then finally the techno zone. The full experience is literally 24 missions and 12 boss encounters. And I'm not gonna lie, this is a long game. The gameplay itself is actually pretty straightforward. You have your basic movement controls, a fire button, and a zap bomb button for dealing damage to all enemies on screen. You can change the controls to whatever you want, but I actually recommend playing this game with a gamepad or an arcade stick because there's some serious issues with this game's control interface. Specifically, there's a full frame of lag between pushing a button and having it respond, and it's worse with the keyboard because keyboard presses are sometimes missed if you only press the key for an instant. Now, if the game was running 60 frames a second, this wouldn't be a big deal, but this game only runs a frame rate of about 12. Seriously. So if you press a button just after a frame is rendered, it isn't going to register until after the next frame, resulting in a maximum delay of just over 0.16 seconds. And it doesn't sound like much, but when it comes to gaming, 0.16 seconds can be an eternity. Control issues aside though, I kinda like the way they handled the weapon system. You start each life firing a single pulse from your guns, but you can upgrade this several times to become a dual shot, a triple shot, a 3-way spread, a 3-way spread with a rear firing shot, and then finally a 5-way spread with a rear firing shot. The weapon upgrade pods come by at very specific intervals, which means they're not based on anything except how long it's been since the last weapon upgrade pod appeared. If you take damage while your weapons are upgraded, you drop back down to your single pulse and enter a brief flashing state for a moment during which you'll be invulnerable. Take damage though with just the single pulse and you'll lose a life. Extra lives in this game though are kind of like candy. You not only find lots of them, but you'll probably scroll through quite a few of them as well due to this game's really high level of difficulty. When you lose a life, you're sent back a few paces in the level, but as long as you can live for a few more moments on your next life, you should be able to get a little further with each attempt until you're finally far enough along to get your weapons upgraded and get yourself back on track. The difficulty not only stems from the way the controls and the screen scrolling work, but a lot of the levels, mostly the later ones, are designed to force you to make choices uses, such as dealing with enemies on one side of the screen or rescuing hostages on the other. One thing you'd be thankful for at least is that you can't die from touching a solid object, you just get blocked by it, though you will die if the solid object crushes you against the bottom of the screen. You can also choose your skill level when starting a new game, with choices of beginner, novice, and expert. This has a number of small effects, including changing the number of enemies you face, changing how often the enemies fire at you, changing the amount of bursts, zap bombs, and extra lives you start with, and slightly affecting how long the various option power-ups last for. The option power-ups are interesting. They show up as spinning letters, and there's 6 different ones you can find, though sometimes they'll also show up with a red shield around them, meaning you can have to shoot them a couple of times to break the shield so you can collect them. B increases your burst count, which is the number of bursts of shots you can have in the air at once. Because of the way the game plays, this maxes out at 8 because that's as many bursts as you could possibly have on screen at any moment. Z increases your number of zap bombs, which when used will flash the screen and deal 2 points of damage to anything in range, as well as eliminate any bullets already on screen in that moment. Be warned though that there are special bombs that can explode into bullets when shot, or when zapped, and anything normally immune to damage will stay perfectly intact. S is a speed booster, which makes you move twice as fast. I actually recommend avoiding this power-up, because the extremely low frame rate of this game makes controlling the speed boost surprisingly difficult, though it can have its uses depending on the situation. R gives you rapid fire for a short while, so that you can stop mashing the fire button repeatedly and just hold it down. True, there is a cheat you can use in the full version for unlimited rapid fire, first by typing the word cheat one letter at a time on the title screen, and then pressing tab and R together during the game, but I decided to go for the non-cheating experience. M gives you a free man, i.e. an extra life. Then finally is the H option, which is even more interesting. It holds the screen in place for a moment and sends some fighters in from the sides to attack you. If you destroy all the fighters that fly in, you'll generate another option, possibly even another H, but the usefulness of the hold option has to do with how the weapon upgrade pods arrive on a timed basis. Although holding the screen generates more enemies to face, it passes some of the time needed for the next weapon upgrade pod to appear, so once you know how to deal with the hold enemies, the hold option becomes surprisingly useful. There's also a few shields you can pick up. To get a shield, you have to wait for this particular kind of ship to appear on screen. You then have to do a bit of damage to it, after which it explodes and releases a shield power-up. There are 3 kinds of shields: side shields, spin shields, and the invulnerability bubble. The side shields generate 2 side barriers which can damage enemies and block their bullets, and they last forever. Or, for a certain number of shots anyways. The spin shields spin around your ship and again can block shots and damage enemies, but they only last a limited amount of time. The invulnerability bubble is fairly self-explanatory. Once obtained, you're fully protected from all forms of damage for a short period of time, though not for as long as the spin shields. Lastly, I'll quickly mention the bosses, because despite there being 12 bosses, they only really come in 4 basic forms. A flying ship that has a giant gun in the middle, a helicopter type thing that splits into 2 smaller forms after being damaged enough, another flying ship that can only take damage when a special core in the middle opens up to fire something at you, and a mothership, which is ginormous, has multiple turrets, launches fighters at you, and has 3 separate stages of actions it performs. Curiously though, the very last boss is a giant treaded tank as opposed to something that flies, which, when you think about it, is kinda anticlimactic. Yeah. So that's pretty much it for Major Stryker. It's not really a game I would recommend trying unless you're a die-hard 2D shooter fan. If you do decide to give it a go, there's 3 very important tips I can give you. The first is not to take any chances. Because everything moves at roughly the same speed you do, and you're such a huge target on screen, it's very hard to thread your way through the onslaughts of enemies and bullets. Instead, stay near the middle when you can, and if you can't shoot something down, just avoid it. Secondly, make liberal use of your zap bombs, because you can not only pick up a ton of them, but the delay in the controls means you can't really perfectly time their use, so you gotta use them a little sooner than you might wish to in order for them to be effective at all. My final tip is that because this game can save your progress at the start of each level, if you lose your weapons during a boss fight and feel you could make it through without losing them, then just reload and try again, because there's no sense beating a boss and having to start the next level with a single pulse unless you really are having excessive trouble with that boss. Anyways, Dosbox settings this time around are once again a piece of cake. Just set the cycles count to auto or max and you're good to go. The graphics scalers look pretty good with this game too, so you might as well turn your favorite one on. And again, I want to recommend that you play this game with a gamepad or arcade stick, because the fact that keyboard keys can be missed, coupled with the extreme lag in the controls to begin with, can make the experience just that much more frustrating with the keyboard. Heck, if you don't have such a device, you may even want to go so far as to just use Dosbox's keymapper to map some of your keyboard keys to joystick functions. That way the game uses uses its joystick processing on your keyboard input instead. I know, it sounds completely pointless and complicated, but it really is a better way to go than using the game's standard keyboard interface. So, that's all for this episode of Ancient DOS Games. Stay tuned for episode 38, where we're going to take a look at another game made in 1993, except this one was made in Taiwan. And I'll give you another hint. It's not Super Fighter. If you know what game it is, then send your guess to adg@pixelships.com and make sure you tune in next Saturday.